Okay, I got the record on for both.
How do you record the meetings? Can you tell me? So, because the secretary of my caucus wants to know. Do you just hit the record button down there?
Well, I'll be recording the meeting.
I know, but for my caucus, how would they do it?
We could probably, we could send you a link to the video. It'll be posted. Mark, do you want to have recording for all, or just we'll post the video?
No, I think Todd, she's asking, she's for her caucus.
My caucus, how
She
can
does
we
Zoom
record our
meetings.
meetings?
She wants to
not
know how to
yours.
record.
Yeah, our meetings, so we can record them.
Oh, just how do you do it in general?
Yeah.
Oh, there's just a record button down at the bottom for the host. The host can click on the record button and it'll record. Right. But then you can also grant permissions to other people to record. That's what I thought you were asking for.
Do you have to do that when you're setting up the meeting?
No, it's just while the meeting's open, it's down there. Like I'm looking at my screen and there's like security participants and then one of them's record.
Yeah, I do see that. Okay, great. Thank you.
This is Drew Martin with the Sierra Club. I'm going to be on mute. I just want to let you know I'm on the phone.
Hi, Drew. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, we've got a lot of folks joining in. We got about 34 participants so far. We do have an agenda. Can we put that up there on the screen for?
Certainly.
There we go. A couple of comments in the beginning, but we'll get right to our program and stuff. We have some representatives. I see Toby Oberdorf, state representative, is on board. Welcome. And also Commissioner Matheson. You on? Yes, I thought you were on, right, Commissioner? City of Stewart. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I'm here, Mark.
Simultaneously.
Double duty on meetings today.
Okay. Yeah, great. So the kind of protocol is, folks, if we can all kind of keep on mute, if you can mute your phone so we don't have background noises, that would be great. I know there's a lot of things going on in our lives today, and these are great to have virtual meetings because you can attend without having to travel, but you know, we'll stick to some protocol. And when we get to question and answers, we'll try to manage them maybe through the chat room too. You can push the chat button at the bottom of your screen and write in a question, if you will, and then we can try to field that question, and or we'll try to go to live questioning if there's not too much overlap with people talking in the beginning. But just kind of glad everybody's here. Thanks for attending the meeting today. There are a lot of things going on in the environment in our river system. We have a lot of impact happening from local basin runoff that's coming through the C23, 24, C44 canals, other canals that are discharging, and the Corps is considering this week of whether or not to start discharges from Lake Okeechobee to both the estuaries because the lake level is getting high, above 15.5 feet. So that's going to be obviously a focus of our agenda as well. We are trying to plan ahead to see, we've got another couple of meetings this year too, one in October and November, and not in December, but in November and October, November, we're planning to have possibly Jennifer Reynolds from the Water Management District prior to be with the Corps. She hopefully can talk about, you know, our program dealing with the water preserve program for the St. Lucie Estuary water protection plan. And then in November, perhaps we can have someone from the Army Corps of Engineers talking about LOSM. So Jim and the program committee is lining those kind of things up, but we're glad everybody's here. Welcome also, Jackie Turlo-Lippisch. Glad you made it back okay from your trip around the Horn, so to say. Came through the lake yesterday, I believe, or recently. So she's got some things to report on the district. So we want to get to our kind of current program in lieu of, you know, everything going on with, you know, our Pledge of Allegiance we normally do. And, you know, it's great that we do that at the City of Stewart. We're unable to kind of meet that today, but I just asked everybody to, you know, think about our country when we begin this meeting and think about why we're able to gather together like this and have the freedom to speak our minds and have our opinions and do what we need to do to kind of make things right. So we're blessed with these freedoms because we have a great country that we live in. And I want us to remember that during today. So let's get started with our program. We have a great program, and thank you, Joanie, for joining us. Joanie Regan from Cocoa Beach. And Jim, I want to let you go ahead and introduce her. Jim?
It's my pleasure and honor to introduce you all to Joanie Regan. She was formerly with the Cocoa Beach Stormwater Management. She is a board member of the Marine Resources Council. She is a Surfrider Foundation charter member on the Treasure Coast. She's a terrific person. And low impact development design is a way of managing stormwater on site and reducing the pollution inputs to the local waterways, as well as preventing or reducing some of the flooding impacts that happen from sort of these large scale stormwater treatment facilities that Florida is notorious for. It's a way of planning the impact that development is going to have to minimize its environmental negative impacts. And with that, I'm going to let Joanie introduce you to LID.
All right,
Joanie.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here and get into full mode, hopefully. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate this. So LID, it's either stormwater, low impact design or low impact development. Either way you look at it, low impact design almost more refers to the tool itself, whereas low impact development, that phrase is more looking at tracts of land and how to best plan for that. Whereas the design gets a little bit more into the design and the construction to build the tools. So here's just a little simple kind of example of how it gets, LID gets right to the root of the problem. It's as simple sometimes as taking a curbing gutter and putting a little curb cut in it to get the water into the ground to infiltrate as close to where it falls as possible. And basically that really is what LID is. It's to try to get the rain cycle back to where it used to be, where the rain infiltrates into the soil as close to where it falls as possible. Again, Jim had mentioned, I just retired after 30-something years with the city of Cocoa Beach. I managed the stormwater utility there. And so most of my presentation has to do with the Cocoa Beach area. I'm more familiar with the central Banana River Lagoon portion. But I just kind of put a little bit of the southern reaches where you guys are from here. Basically these inlets here you're well familiar with. Up where we are, it's more up near the Space Center, Titusville, Milburn, Merritt Island area. But again, it's an estuary and these inlets have everything to do with the flushing. But as we know, those inlet flushing just goes so far and everything else that goes in kind of stays in. It's pretty much a landlocked lagoon. So the biggest part of the problem of our conventional civil engineering design of stormwater from the past was to basically use gravity, which is really hard to undo, to get the water to move downstream, away from where it falls, over all sorts of impervious surfaces, roadways, sidewalks, parking lots, dwellings, buildings, into a storm drain or into a conveyance system that quickly gets it downstream into our receiving waters, our waterways, as fast as possible. This particular one was a 54-inch, a little over 4-foot diameter outfall into a canal in Cocoa Beach. And we put in a compound weir. This was the third one we put in. The first two got blown off by the flow. So we finally figured one that was wide enough and designed correct to be able to allow the flow to come out when we have heavy rains. This was a compound weir. You can't see it. It's a rectangular weir with a little V notch so we can get accurate flow measurements and also calibrate it. We have the sampler here. We were taking rainfall data and flow data. Basically, our compound weir was designed for a little over between 800 and 900 gallons a minute. there were plenty of rainfalls that were so strong that it was way over that amount. We knew it was at least between 800 and 900 gallons a minute, but this volume is immeasurable at this point, the peak of the storm, and we estimate somewhere around 1,200 gallons a minute, somewhere like that. So it's a lot of water. It's not a small amount of water. It seems like a little amount of rain, but when we funnel it, concentrate it all down to the discharge point, it's a huge volume of water, huge flows. And that in turn causes a poor water quality, both from turning the water over, resuspending all those sediments, and also putting in those nutrients and pollutants that cause the algae blooms, whether they're microalgae blooms, macroalgae blooms. We've definitely seen plenty of our fair share of that over the decades. And that all leads to our reduction, our loss of habitat for our fisheries, our shellfish industry, and of course we know what devastating seagrass losses we have had over the last decade and a half. And the final blow is the muck that we have on the bottom of our canals, of our lagoon. We call it the legacy load. It's housing all of that pollutants over the years, whether it's nutrients, metals that don't go away, hydrocarbons, the old leaded gasoline. We have found that in our muck. And this is both from the pollutants going in, whether it's leaf litter, vegetation, dirt, car washing, soaps, blah, blah, blah. But it's also part of the 24/7, 365 algae blooms that we have sometimes that die, sink to the bottom, the bacteria blooms, die, sink to the bottom. So it's a big mix of all sorts of things, this legacy load. And we have done profiles in our canals, and they can go anywhere from 2-3 feet up to 8 feet. We have actually profiled it, and they're quite deep. And of course, they all go to those deep areas. So basically, I'm going to be trying to build the case for LID, low impact design, moving away from our conventional stormwater design to get the rain to fall, soak in as quickly as possible. So this is Cocoa Beach in 1956. The town was incorporated in 1926, but it was a slow growing town until the space boom. And in 1956, it really started going off. And so this is Cocoa Beach today. Basically, we added land through dredge and fill. A lot of our cul-de-sac streets were wetlands, and so we dredged and created these waterfront properties in the 1960s. This is the Thousand Islands, which in itself, we know now was an overwash formation from a cataclysmic storm event that basically topped the dune and deposited this alluvial fan formation of islands in the Banana River Lagoon. So this happened over decades, building of the land and covering it with impervious structures. And even in the pervious areas, a lot of times it's the St. Augustine Floritan lawn. So it's not the natural environment where it used to be. So we have the urbanization infrastructure of a storm sewer system go in, impervious creep, and quickly the green turns gray. In Cocoa Beach, the percentage of private land versus public roadways is 90% of our land, our developed land, is under private ownership, and 3% are like the arterial corridors, the skeletal roadways of our city. And this is where all of our drainage system is. And so basically, we have designed these giant campuses of impervious to all drain out into our 3% of our public roadways and expect that we can put projects in there and get it to clean and filter the water at the rate that stormwater is coming off. So we have really, looking at the civil engineering design, it's much to be desired. So 3% of the public roadways cannot mitigate 97% of the privately owned development. Basically, different percentages in different places. Urban areas are going to be tougher, but basically there's more privately owned land than public. And it's not just the water quality. It's not just that all of this water drains down into our waterways and creates impaired waters. But we're also causing flooding. So you have lots of water from upstream flowing downstream to where the water table is almost at the surface. Down in this downstream area, pipes are full. You can't put water where water is. So what we wind up having is the lagoon, great lagoon rise, elevation wise, water level rise, saturatedly full pipes downstream. And then we wind up getting these areas where you just can't drain these roadways. This is a restaurant where people are actually having to take off their shoes to get to their car because the service road of State Road 520 is flooded. And at this point, if the lagoon's high or the water table's high, there's nowhere to put the water. And with sea level rise, this phenomenon will only get worse. And in the 1980s, when they passed the stormwater rule, we started having permitting and stormwater management, stormwater treatment. So basically the design at the time, which was a great improvement over straight out to the lagoon, was to put in an area on the parcel where all of the stormwater went. And so the entire flow from all of these impervious areas were put into these small stormwater management areas. And this is a dry retention pond that's about 40 years old. This no longer drains. This no longer infiltrates. It's full of thatch, fine sediment, silts. And during the wet season, this remains mucky. You can't really walk across it the entire time. It really needs a full excavation. But if it hadn't been put in the first place, we'd have a lot less headaches on our 40 years later. This is actually wet pond. So all of this development goes to these two wet ponds. These are algae-ridden wet ponds. It's like putting 50 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. These ponds themselves can grow nutrients so that they're actually exporting more nutrients than they're bringing in. So if you get these algae blooms and then they die, this water can sometimes be worse than the lagoon water. And when you get heavy rains and they discharge, it's discharging lots of nutrients. And I guess I was going to say, with these kinds of stormwater management approaches, the best day is the day that it's accepted after it's permitted, and then it goes downhill from there. So just a little bit of this is the only one I could really find for Cocoa Beach, because we are a built out community, built out small town. This is the typical conventional stormwater design. This is all impervious surface, building, parking lot, asphalt, concrete, and it's draining into this small retention area here, dry retention. This is east, this is west. Flow is generally from the ocean, the dune, down to the lagoon to the west. This multifamily dwelling development here is lower than this grocery store, supermarket campus. When they get heavy rains and it fills up, this water goes right through that sandy dune, and these folks now are starting to get flooded. So if they had redesigned this, changed the design to make this low impact design, there would be lots of areas of infiltration upstream for that water to get in the soil, so it wasn't all being quickly pushed down here and then now drains through, it leaches through the earthen berm of the retention area. This is the Courtyard of Marriott and the, what else is it? The Hilton? No, Courtyard Marriott in Cocoa Beach. And basically, it was a beautiful maritime hammock. When they first submitted the design, it was the conventional design like this. We fought hard to save as much canopy tree as possible. And so basically, this is where a lot of the environmental conferences are held now, because it's a beautiful area and it's a great place to show what can be done by leaving the lay of the land and working with what's there to begin with and using trees as a best management practice. So these are basically the tools in the LID tool case, and I'll be talking about each one separately. So a little bit about the why. Basically, I'm going to be saying, what, why, and then how. The why is, it reduces the volume to the waterways, which reduces the pollutant to the waterways. It reduces that intensity at the storm outfall, so it's not stirring everything up. it recharges, it goes back into the soil, so it recharges the local aquifer. And that in turn nourishes that soil bacteria that have been expecting water. They've been getting rain forever, and now all of a sudden they don't see that rain anymore. So it gets that biota working so that they can better mitigate the pollutants in that rainwater, in the stormwater runoff. Again, it reduces the soil microbes then in turn use those nutrients so that the groundwater is preserved from nitrogen and phosphorus. By putting the water back into the ground, you're abating saltwater intrusion. By putting all that fresh water out to the lagoon, you're welcoming the salt water to come into those local aquifers. It reduces that downstream flooding, king tides that we had talked about. And again, it's promoting this green space and natural resources. Some basic principles of low impact design. You minimize your impervious footprint. You only put in what you need. You preserve the lay of the land, the trees that are on site already doing work for capturing and mitigating some of that stormwater. You plant tree canopy. You make all of those green areas that used to be put into berms, all these berms that then they themselves would run off, we recess them so that they can store and infiltrate that water. Where you need pavement, you can put impervious pavement that allows it to soak in, infiltrate. This is becoming a really big deal. Elevated structures for buildings, decks, patios. If it's above the ground, everything below it is able to soak in. So you're not creating runoff. And then this isn't really, well, the underground storage isn't really LID, that's more conventional, but provides available storage underground. Rainwater harvesting is really big, providing that storage above ground so that you're not using up your in the ground infiltration with a big storage tank. And then some innovative BMPs that cities and big box stores are starting to do now. Tree canopy, we all know if it starts raining, regular rain, you can get under a tree. A lot of times you won't get wet. You can see these areas after rain under the trees that are still dry. They are the most efficient, premier stormwater BMP. And all other stormwater BMPs, the day you put it in and start it functioning, that's its best day, and then it goes downhill from there. Trees, as they grow, they become more efficient at mitigating stormwater. So they capture and store rain, they slow down the runoff, they, as we know, they moderate the climate, they release oxygen into the air, they scrub the air of pollutants, they provide habitat to our gray infrastructure. It has been shown, and we all know this, treed downtowns do really well. A stark downtown with very little tree canopy often is not the busiest place in town. It's been shown that it lowers crime and basically it increases well-being, which has a lot to do with all that other stuff. This is from data from the Center for Urban Research, Forest Research. This is a representation of an undeveloped site and the canopy. In the 1930s, they found that about 47% of the canopy was retained. And basically they didn't have the giant machines to go in there. They didn't have computer-aided design. By the 1950s, you start getting bigger machines. They were able to get in there and clear the land faster. 30% of the canopy was retained. By the 1980s, now you have computer-aided design. Civil engineers, landscape architects, they can design from their desk. They don't even go out and see what's there to begin with. 16% of the canopy was being retained. And by the 1990s, that went down to 4%. So now getting into a little bit of what that looks like, what LID looks like. Again, with tree canopy being the premier, it can hold a lot of water, which then evaporates back up into the air. And it's shown that they can intercept between 15 and 35% of the annual rainfall, depending on the tree, depending on the size of the canopy, depending on the cluster of the canopy. And another thing about the cluster of the canopy, when you put large trees together in clusters, their branches interweave, and they actually produce very strong protection of what's underneath it from tropical force winds. I live in a canopied area, and it's amazing of how they break up that energy. And so a lot of people are afraid of these because of tropical events. I say it protects sometimes you're going to get damaged. You're going to get damaged sometimes worse without the trees because the full force of the wind is on the roof. But to me, overall, I believe if you put the right tree in, and live oaks are great, they will produce protection for the assets underneath them. And then we have rain gardens. Basically, you're using the lay of the street to add green infiltration areas between what's running off in the block, what's running off on the sidewalk, a little at a time in these linear corridors of green. It can be very effective of getting that water into the ground versus into a storm drain or a ditch and out to the waterways. When you need to put in impervious because of walkways or parking or decks, patios, they have great pervious pavers now. It used to be that they would get clogged. They had sand between the pavers themselves. Now they use interlocking. There's no sand, so the water goes down so much quickly. But even better than pavers is decking. If you have decking that's elevated with slats, there's dirt underneath it, it barely knows that there's a surface on top of it, and all of that water can get infiltrated down. So decking is really a great thing for walkways, patios, decks. And then elevated structures. We used to only see these in still places, down in Dauphine Island, down where they had storm surge, consistent storm surge, where you had to get your dwelling up there. But now we know that if you elevate it and there's not impervious, no slab, there's actually dirt underneath the home, it barely knows that this footprint of a dwelling, the house can be as big as you want. If it can soak in from a stormwater point of view, it's basically not producing runoff. It's premier LID, and not only for water quality, it mitigates flooding, less downstream water effect, king tides, and if we do get sea level rise or storm surges if you're by the coast, this definitely produces that resiliency that's becoming a really big deal now. And then managing the water on site. There's lots of reasons why you would want to keep water on site for landscaping, for gray water uses, and also during Hurricane Irma, we in my area lost water for about 3 to 4 days. And basically it was a main line onto the barrier island that was in bad shape, that they were afraid they had to inspect it before they put the water back on, because if it ever broke, that whole thing is catastrophic, trying to do a boil water once you get so much contamination into a main water line. So they had shut it off for 3 to 4 days. And all of us knew where, storages of water were. We were all going to Patrick Air Force Base because they have a water tank down there, and the beaches down by Patrick Air Force Base had water at their beach accesses. So cisterns can actually be very useful in emergency situations too. And then you have this, they could be made into artwork. They used to be very ugly, clumsy looking. Now they're making them flush, they're making them artistic. And this one takes water from a multi-story building and it overflows into a cascaded fountain that again becomes part of a rain garden infiltration zone. And then underground storage. This isn't really considered LID. It's definitely not green infrastructure, but there are places where you're just not going to be able to do all that, or you're not going to be able to get the volume that you need because of the amount of volume that's coming into this area, where you have to put these underground tanks. And these underground tanks can either can store water and can be used as reuse, or they can be permeable so that they store it and then slowly infiltrate it into the ground. The problem with these, and it's really easy for civil engineers to want to throw these in the ground because it's a lot of money, but you throw it in the ground, you cover it up, and then you can do whatever you want on top of it. But these are going to be really hard to maintain in the future. It's just another one of those things where they only have a life, whether it's 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. How they design these is they put permeable cloth, geofabric underneath it, and that's to, in some degree, to keep the water from coming up and bringing silt and particles into these systems and clogging them. But it itself will get clogged over time. They grow a little bit of algae. Sometimes that can be good because it can reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus. But again, after 20, 30, 40 years, these things will fail. If you have a parking lot or even worse, a building on top, something that's very difficult, it's going to be a very, very expensive replacement. And they're kind of hard to inspect. They design them so that they have sumps to try to capture a lot of the debris, a lot of the dirt, so that it doesn't go into the full system. But you're always going to get some, and when they start failing, it's going to be a very difficult fix. And then these used to be more just in urban areas. Chicago has a lot, Berlin, Europe, Germany. They were one of the first to start these green roofs and green walls. But basically, big box stores anywhere where the real estate has a huge dwelling, a huge structure, it's a huge amount of impervious that you can put this green on and have much, much less having to be dealt with by the rest of the site. So you're able to grow bigger. You're able to make a larger building. And these are not dirt green roofs. They have a media that's meant to be able to support the growth on top of it. And it's lightweight. And a lot of times the overflow from these green roofs go into a cistern at the base and then can be used to irrigate the system during dry weather. So these are lightweight, and often they can really reduce the energy consumption of the building too. A typical roof with a dark roofing material heats up the building, and this also becomes a great living space. So you can make this become another story within the dwelling, within the structure. Just a quick little thing, Cocoa Beach, we had the same downtown for probably 40, 50 years. It was devoid of trees. It had gotten so urbanized, fully concrete, asphalt, and buildings. We almost redeveloped it so many times over the decades, and good thing we didn't, because we were able to coordinate a redevelopment project for our 5-block downtown area and put stormwater management, low impact design in the ground at the same time. And really you wouldn't know it because the low impact design is the redevelopment of the street itself with trees, green areas, and walkways. So we used the tree canopy. We had some existing tree canopy, but we also added silver buttonwoods and lots of them along the corridor. And they're a lot larger now. This is when it first went in. These in time will produce a really good thick canopy in the downtown and do a lot to mitigate the volume that even goes to these other components. So we have rain gardens along the entire 5 blocks. So what used to go directly into a storm drain now goes into a sediment sump and overflows out into these rain gardens. The parking pavers are permeable pavers, and it's amazing of how well they work. Heavy rains, very, very little overflows these into the rain gardens. And then we have these small tree wells. They're really not much of a stormwater component, but they add a little bit. And this is regular. We used regular pavers for the sidewalks because permeable would be too expensive for the entire project, and we didn't feel it was needed with so much of it going into these permeable areas. But pavers themselves are a little bit better than just concrete slab sidewalks. They do allow some to wick into those pavers. Okay, so now we're getting into the really hard part, which is how to get LID established within the lagoon. And luckily, we're not the first folks trying to do this. It's been well established for decades in other areas, such as the Chesapeake, DC, Virginia, Maryland, and that DC area, over Puget Sound, with Seattle, and the Pacific Northwest in general has been a big area. And other states, certain areas in Wisconsin and the Midwest have also really embraced it. But this is where the challenge, it's changing the norm, getting the barge to turn, because it's not easy like trying to get people to turn their mower around the other way so that the grass clippings blow back on the lawn rather than into the canal or into the roadway, or getting landscape folks to blow the grass clippings back up into the lawn. This is a lot harder. It's a cultural change. It takes changes in the local governments at the state level in order to make this happen here in Florida and here in the lagoon. And it's a really good time. It's a right time. There's a Senate bill that's going to start to be implemented in January that I'm not an expert on, but I might be able to talk to a little bit. But basically, the state is having to incorporate it into their new stormwater rule. But at the same time, it's really important that local governments incorporate it into their local land development code, because the one size fits all for the state will not be able to address local conditions. For instance, right now we have the ERP, the Environmental Resource Permit, is our stormwater management tool at the state level. Most small campuses don't even fall under that. It doesn't kick the threshold. So in an area where you have a lot of small parcels, which is most of the coast, they don't even, unless we have local regulations, they don't even have to do it. If it's developed already and the redevelopment, a lot of times it doesn't even kick their threshold. So it's important that we do it locally. So what the tools we have in our toolbox locally are the comprehensive plan, kind of an overall vision for the city, which incorporates the conservation element, the infrastructure elements, land development code. This is really where it hits the tires hit the asphalt, where this is complicated because we don't all want to have different codes. We want to have a kind of a similar, at least, so that the civil engineering designs, the developers, the realtors, they all know what to expect. They're not going into each city and having different set of regulations, requirements, middle requirements. We, in our stormwater utilities department, have a thing called the stormwater NPDES permit that it's really the city has to implement. We each have one. Every single local government has one. There's portions in here that kind of hit that LID concept. And then a biggie is the Indian River Lagoon BMAP. We all have it now. We're all under a BMAP. And it's mostly centered on projects so that the stormwater utility, the little department that has control of that 3% of the public roadways, suddenly has to solve the problem for the entire 97% or that huge percentage of privately owned land that's discharging into the waterways and into the roadways. And again, those projects have to be pretty amazing to be able to solve that problem. And most of us in the stormwater world don't think that those projects can really do it over time. So DEP recognized that. And in the BMAPs, there's a section called Future Growth in the Basin. This is where DEP admits that the projects of municipalities, stormwater projects, aren't going to cut mustard. So I'm just going to read this portion of the Future Growth in the Basin because I think it's really important for this concept and for the implementation of this in the lagoon. Since the TMDL, and I'm assuming everybody knows what those are, reductions are based on decreasing loads from past development, it is important that loads from new development are well controlled. Although future development may meet state stormwater standards, that's the ERP, that's the current things, that all those ponds that are turning green and producing more nutrients into the waterways than they're taking out. Although future development may meet state stormwater standards, the development may still add a nutrient load to the lagoon. To ensure that future growth does not add to the degradation of this was the Banana River Lagoons one, but the Indian River Lagoon, local governments must be proactive in controlling loads from future growth. Options to addressing future loading include low impact development standards and Florida-friendly landscape to further minimize the impacts of existing development and new development through local development regulations. LID is an approach to development that employs land planning, design practices, and technologies to conserve natural resources and reduce infrastructure costs. These activities could offset loads from future growth and therefore may reduce the reductions needed from the entities in future BMAP iterations. Basically, they're saying, if we get control of the private side of things with LID, we might have to put in less projects in those little roadways that we have where we're trying to deal with it right now. Then it says DEP will continue to research how nutrient reduction credits could be quantified for use of LID BMPs. Basically, they're saying we're all trying to put these projects in the ground to get credit for our BMAP. They're going to be looking at ways where if our development services departments, our community development departments, if they're adding LID into private development coming in, perhaps that can be added to credits we get in the BMAT. And now we move into, this is the end of my presentation. I don't know if Lisa's there out there, but basically the MRC, the Marine Resources Council, is trying to do a real push of LID in the lagoon wide now, because we know the time is right. We know that the state has this mandate to start LID coming January 2021. So we developed a letter that basically is the ask of local governments, the ask of the state, and we got a whole slew of groups to sign on with us. And we have already sent out this letter to all local governments along the lagoon, cities, counties. We've also sent it to the state. We've sent it to DEP, critical other state agencies, the governor, and we are about to be sending it out to our local delegation. And this is the ask of the local government. We strongly recommend that local leaders act quickly to approve ordinances to establish low impact design as the new standard of development in the drainage basin of the Indian River Lagoon. The current pace of growth in the watershed demands that we act now for our lagoon's future. And again, these are the groups that have signed on as code signers with us, and we thank them very much. Together, we can really make a difference of keeping the pressure on, because it's really a hard cultural change. This is happening in our permitting departments, in our development services department, and it's really hard when you've been doing something for decades the same way to suddenly change. It's the civil engineers, it's the landscape architects, it's developers, it's the local governments themselves that have to change. So we're very thankful to everybody who has signed on with us, because it really adds to the momentum. And that's the end of the presentation. You got to always have the last slide. I don't have a sunset here, but the world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. Einstein. So with that, I was basically given the what, why, how, and then Lisa was going to go into the MRC and what we're doing as an organization. But is she there?
Lisa, I think you are on the call. You were. Are you still there? Lisa. Lisa. Maybe she checked off. I see that she is still there. Yeah. Lisa, can you hear us? She's on mute. I see her, but I see her on mute.
Oh, hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was
Lisa
trying to
Soto
find the
from
unmute button.
Marine Resources Council. Go ahead.
So my name is Lisa Soto. I'm the Executive Director of MRC. Thank you for inviting Joanie and unknowingly inviting me to participate today. I'm going to be brief. I've known Joanie for almost 20 years. I will never forget how long it's been, because I was pregnant with my son when we met. So you can always use your kids kind of as that monitor of how when time goes by. But I was working with the University of Central Florida Stormwater Management Academy, and a mutual friend of ours, Marguerite Engel, who used to be with St. John's, introduced us and said, Joanie's going to be a fantastic resource for you. And she certainly has been and continues to be on our board of directors. Some of the research that we were involved with at UCF was trying to figure out what was preventing LID from being implemented in Florida. And I was, still am, or I'd like to be more of a social marketing researcher. And I was working at the time at the national level with the North American LID Social Marketing Committee and our partners at the University of Florida Program for Resource Efficient Communities here in Florida to collect information from developers, from regulators, from land use planning type folks, to understand what's preventing LID from being implemented in Florida. And it basically boiled down to, areas like planning, that there are existing municipal codes that conflict with LID implementation, that the zoning ordinances aren't written to allow it to be incorporated into the design, that there were regulatory and permitting disincentives in place, that there were no credits that were being issued, like Joanie mentioned, for LID to offset other restrictions. It wasn't being integrated into the planning process early enough, and that there weren't adequate really design specs and standards. And as far as maintenance, which has been a legitimate concern for a long time, once you implement something, who's going to maintain it, especially if it's on private property? So, getting the codes in place that would identify and ensure and enforce the maintenance of the LID design over the long term. Who's responsible for maintenance? Who's going to be doing it? And is it going to be adequate to maintain the performance of it? And then implementation. Inertia is the biggest challenge to overcome. Like Joanie said, a lot of people think that we've been doing it this way, it's worked in the past, and I'm not going to change the way I'm doing things. However, it's not working, and things do need to be changed, but we need to demonstrate that. So as far as implementation is concerned, there's a lot of challenges in the built-out urban areas. There are safety concerns with roads flooding or houses flooding. There's a lack of technical expertise and limited technical performance criteria and data. And then there's just some bad perceptions or some misperceptions about LID that, people would like to brush it off and say it's not a proven technique. Some people don't trust it. They think it's something new and it's not going to work. There's just the aesthetic concerns. It doesn't, they want everything to look neat and tidy, not be so I guess wild looking, all of these trees and shrubberies are just look messy. LID is costly. These are all misperceptions. And then of course, they're not certain. The engineering desire for certainty and knowing, this is going to be effective and I know that this is going to work. So our goal has been to create a project, and it would start with almost doing a community forum like the assemblies that MRC has done in the past. To overcome the challenges and address them head on in a room with the delegates of our stakeholder communities, which would be developers, of course, the planning people, the building people, the land development regulation people, the state and federal government oversight people that are doing the permitting of these projects, get everybody in a room and show them where it's being effectively implemented, share system performance data, cost effectiveness data, try to go through each of these barriers one by one and have the real life conversation about, this does work, it is cost effective, it's a change that needs to be made in order to protect our water bodies, and do that through a community forum, and then work locally with our local governments to review the existing codes that we have, building codes, land development codes, landscaping codes, and determine, what changes can be made in these codes to accommodate LID concepts, in your regular land development process, and then strategize to, overcome some of the codes that are disincentivizing LID, and encourage LID implementation and assure that long-term operation and maintenance that's going to be necessary. And then finally, to create a template low-impact development / stormwater manual that would fully integrate LID into the process of building and creating stormwater management for the local government, and use that template as a tool to go throughout the lagoon and share it with all of the cities and counties that really have a desire to do this. So we wrote that up in a proposal to FDP, submitted it about 1.5 years ago now. Still haven't received word, which is, I guess, no surprise. But it doesn't look like they're going to fund it. So we're trying to find another source of funding to start this initiative here. We do think that it's important to have that meaningful conversation in advance to build momentum, foster the leadership that we need, foster the community support that we're going to need to change ordinances. Once you get into the county or city council chamber, the more people you can have speaking logically about why the ordinance needs to be changed, the better, in my experience. And so, we want to try to build momentum for this from the ground up, and at the same time be working with our community agencies to figure out how we can overcome the disincentives that are in place in the current land development code. So that's what we've been working on as far as the project. Of course, I hope that many of you have seen the LID letter that came from the board that has been signed by over 20 other organizations besides ours, encouraging local governments to implement LID. We got a response back from St. Lucie County where and this is what I would encourage everybody to do, if you've got the letter, Commissioner Zadowski forwarded to his staff and asked them the question, are we doing this? And their staff member, Jen McGee, did a fantastic job of responding to the commissioner with an overview of how they have attempted to address LID in their existing land development code, and even has a staff recommendation of what she would like to see, encouraged further. She's, right now it's a voluntary statement, and she would like to she's suggesting the commissioner that would be nice if this was something that wasn't just voluntary. So that's kind of what we were hoping was going to happen, that people would get this letter, they would forward it to their staffs and their personnel and say, are we doing this, or how would we do this? And we start that conversation at the local level. So I was happy to see this from Commissioner Zadowski arrive in the email, so I could forward it onto the board and let them know that it's working, that people are reading it and they're responding and they're starting the conversation. So thank you for inviting us, and thank you for helping us spread the word.
All right. Thank you a lot, Joanie and Lisa. I know we're kind of on time. We're trying to stick to some agenda and stuff. So there are a lot of county folks and city folks that are on the site. I know they're hearing this presentation. Jim wanted to make sure we invited a lot of the Martin County people to the site. Jim, do you want to handle any quick questions or comments that we can make real quick and then move on from here? So. Jim, you're on mute, so. Jim?
Yeah, am I there now?
Yeah, you're there now, good.
So I did notice that Diane from the,
Diane Hughes? Mm-hmm.
No, well, Diane Hughes is there as well, but I think the idea of native plants versus some of the exotic plants that tend to be used is really important to the LID process.
Okay.
And I think City of Titusville is doing an excellent job of working on LIDs that support LDRs that support the LID concept. Joanie, did you see any other questions that you wanted to address? Joanie, unfortunately, you're still muted.
If anybody has any questions, you can put it in the chat
Put it in
log,
the chat
or
box
just
at the bottom.
raise your hand in your video and I'll try to unmute you or unmute yourself.
I know we're very interested in how, of course, it affects stormwater and stormwater runoff, particularly with the river and the water interests that we have. But it's also about conserving water and making sure that the water, stays on site and is either worked through the vegetation and also through wetland areas to recharge aquifers that we depend on for drinking water. So these are really kind of important things. Some of them, I think Martin County particularly is already implementing through their comprehensive plan or through the LDRs that they have, but there are things that are probably new to that have come out through this presentation, and I hope that.
I think it becomes even more critical when you start to add in the increased volume of rainfall we're getting, as well as the storm surge that we're getting, in tropical events, as well as sea level rise, and this idea that draining everything to the roadway is just not going to work in the future, and we're going to have to come up with some other solutions.
Right. So thank you again for really coming across with this. I'm sure we have some questions or thoughts. I know the Rivers Coalition Board considered it, and I think would be obliged to sign on to that kind of letter that does help to kind of move it into putting it in front of local government agendas and things, and also the state support for it too. So we can move ahead. Next on the agenda, we're going to talk about some of the agency kind of updates and reports. I think we start with Martin County. And is John or Katie on the line?
I'll be
Anybody?
giving that report.
Or Diane? Yeah, would you go ahead, Diane Hughes from Martin County?
Sure. I don't have any slides or anything, so this is just going to be a verbal report. So
Great.
water quality for the middle estuary is for salinity is pretty poor right now, between 1 PSU to a little over 12 practical salinity units, which is fairly poor, but the Corps has been reporting that it's good for oysters, and I think that's a little bit low for oysters. The chlorophyll A levels are about 1.45 micrograms per liter to around 11 micrograms per liter. When you think about chlorophyll A associated with blooms, when it gets up around 40 is when we start seeing blooms. So the levels are fairly low enough that we're luckily not seeing anything. Dissolved oxygen levels in the middle estuary are fairly good, around 4.5 to almost 5 milligrams per liter. I did see one low dissolved oxygen in the South Fork, and it's down around 2.43. So it's a little bit depressed in the South Fork. The temperatures and water temperatures are ranging between 81 to 84 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a little bit lower than they were earlier in the week. Earlier in the week, they were around 84 to 86 degrees. So I think this little bit of cooler weather is reducing the water temperatures. One other thing that we got a report of in the past week was some really brown water in the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. And the reports even went to Dwayne DeFries up that way for IRL. I did see a picture of it, looked like chocolate milk, so it definitely looks like it's some turbidity from some type of construction site. And we worked with St. Lucie County to find a source, but we were unable to locate any source of that turbidity. So if anyone has seen anything out there, yeah, please let us know if you see anything like that out there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now let's talk about the Indian River Lagoon and the inlet area. The salinities there are pretty good. They're in the 26 to 30 practical salinity use range. Chlorophyll A levels are about the same as middle estuary, around 2.62 to 13.34 micrograms per liter. The higher little 13 is near Manatee Pocket. DO levels in that area are also very well, about 3.8 to 5 milligrams per liter. And the temps are pretty steady in the Indian River Lagoon and near the inlet, around 83 degrees Fahrenheit. I haven't had any reports of any fish kills or algae blooms or anything like that. If anyone does see that stuff, we would hope that you would report it to us so that we can, investigate it and get it sampled.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Yeah, we're going to be talking about some more local conditions. I know Mike Connor, Indian Riverkeeper, and our water quality stuff comes up a little later. But thanks a lot for that update. I know we've been having some discharges from the C44 canal and basin, and as well as our local runoff with C23, C24, and it's causing a lot of abnormal freshwater conditions on top of what we already have. So we're very concerned about how duration that goes and the turbidity and how it affects the oyster reefs and seagrass and the habitats particularly. Let's go to City of Stewart. Is Ben on, or I know Commissioner
I'm here. Can you hear me, Mark?
Yeah, Ben, go ahead. Ben Hogarth.
Yeah. I didn't want to rehash kind of what's going on with the LOSUM. I'd rather just kind of provide a very brief update of some of the things that Stewart's done in the past couple of months. Yeah. Obviously, the LOSUM process is going to be continuing for another year and a half or so, at least through the end of next year, but we're still working on the performance measures with all the different PET members. So
good. Well, I think that's great. We're trying to get an update, maybe program on that. Jim's working with the Corps of Engineers for possibly November. So
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff going on there. We've made a lot of headway. I'm feeling very positive about that part. Some of the other things that are kind of happening in the world, I'm hoping most folks in the coalition are aware of. Back in July, the city sent out a letter to the South Florida Water Management District in reference to the savings clause that's in SERP. We sent that letter kind of as a retort to a meeting that occurred in May, where some of the folks, private folks, some of the folks in the center of the state kind of were vouching and supporting this idea of adding the savings clause to the WRDA bills, the Water Resources Development Act. So the city ended up sending a letter to the district, just kind of making a point-by-point, play-by-play focus on the law in the 2000 WRDA bill and where all this came from, and kind of illustrated the legal history, the legislative intent, and showed why including the savings clause into the WRDA bill would be very fallible, and it would kind of fly in the face of everything that we've been trying to do for the last 20 years. So the city sent that out. If anybody ever wants a copy of any of this, please feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat so everybody has it. I'm happy to share that. The commission was very supportive of sending that letter out. The other thing we recently did, Commissioner Matheson, I'm sure he could speak more to it, requested that the city write a letter of thanks and support to the Center for Biological Diversity, the Water Keeper Alliance, and the Calusa River Keeper, or Water Keeper, I should say, for a lawsuit that they filed against the Army Corps, and I think even the Florida Wildlife organization there, because they didn't follow the process that is in federal law when it came to discharges to the West Coast. And that lawsuit ended up succeeding in court. At least initially, they got a partial summary judgment. So without going into all the details of that lawsuit, it basically provided a clarification that the law needs to be followed when it comes to endangered species and the protection of endangered species. And there's a set formal process, and the Army Corps, all the federal agencies need to follow that process. And it simply wasn't followed before. So I think it's a symbolic victory, but hopefully it'll have some functional ramifications for us in the future. But that's it for my update for just kind of recent actions. And I'll allow Commissioner Matheson to speak and update if he wants to say anything else.
Commissioner, and I see Becky Brenner is also on board.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Commissioner.
Okay, yep. Thank you, Ben, for the update. I'll keep in mind I have fellow commissioners on the call as well. It was a great presentation today, and I know we have our development director and some of our public works teams here listening into the presentation, which one of the things I was very interested for our staff to hear, and the city's already been moving in that low impact development direction. We've had projects with more bioswales than they'd be required by our code. They retain a lot of the PUDs. All of them basically are required to retain water on site. We've got, rain garden plan for Shepherd's Park area. A lot of projects have pervious cement and asphalt. So we're going to have our staff, look at the different options, and it was an excellent presentation. As Ben summarized some of the stuff we've been doing, drafting letters and encouraging those nonprofits and the work they've done to fight for our waterways. Even with the lake height being as low as it was in the summer, here we are, looking down the face of potential discharges. And even yesterday, I emailed after our periodic scientist call, stressing that, as you actually mentioned, Mark, that we do have high water coming really close because of the king tides to some residential communities back in the South Fork. And under those conditions with LORS 08, they're supposed to hold off on discharges. So I want to thank Mike Connors on the line for forwarding me some pictures that I was able to pass along to Colonel Polk and Savannah Lacey of the Corps, and encourage them for what she talked about in her periodic scientist call yesterday of possibly banking some of those discharges. And the way that would work is hopefully that water bank of discharges that they could hold off on now might then have the ability, the Corps would have the flexibility to maybe pass those along to the Caloosahatchee when they need water in the dry season. And that's something City of Stewart's really supportive of. But I'll let us continue on from there, and excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Great. That's great. So we appreciate City of Stewart's being active about the river issues, and particularly from both the federal and state levels, and you know, taking an active role in our local community there about that. Next, we move to Water Management District, and we're honored to have Jackie Thurl-Lipich with us, one of our governing board members from the district. Jackie, do you want to give us an update of the meeting this month was on the 10th, and there were some other things that you want to bring up for the Water Management District?
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to see everybody. And Ms. Regan, I was really intrigued by your presentation, and thank you very much. I think that's totally important, and hopefully in time, somehow they will require former development to implement such things, maybe if they're destroyed by 50% of a hurricane or something, just like with flood. My husband and I just got back from doing the Southern Loop, which was quite an experience in our trawler. We're still married and we're still alive, so we're feeling pretty good about it. And it gave me an opportunity to see waters that I am to represent as a South Florida Water Management Governing Board member that I have not seen before, like Biscayne Bay and Florida Bay and Lake Okeechobee, not just from an airplane. And it was,
but that's what it is. It's a disguise. It's a
sorry, and it was very, very inspirational and educational. I was on for the board meeting, the governing board meeting, and the most noteworthy things was we approved an interconnect canal from the C-44 canal to the C-23 canal that they are going to start on almost immediately. And this has been in the works for a long time, but as you know, the Army Corps is moving very quickly with C-23, C-24, which is great. But hopefully that money's not coming out of the EAA reservoir. But if it is, I'd rather them use it for something close to home than something far away. But that canal will be just outside of Allapattah and connect the two canals. They have said that in the literature and law, they will not be able to send more water to us that way, but it will be sending water from C-23 canal, which is a filthy canal, one of the worst. My brother's daughter did a report on that when she was in high school, and it was, at the time she did it, the worst phosphorus nitrogen canal. And that will be sent through the C-44 STA reservoir and cleansed before it goes into the St. Lucie River. The other thing of interest is that we approved $27 million to improve STA-2. And that's great, but I have been asking all the while if it is supposed to be even between the agricultural privilege tax and the cost to the taxpayers for these stormwater treatment areas. And I hate to hear myself say it, but listening to Ms. Reagan's presentation, where she said everything has a life, you know, those STAs probably have a life too. So they have to be changed out. That's very expensive. And I think it's great that Toby Overdorf, as our representative, is on the phone, is on the call, because over time, we will have to look at the cost of these systems to clean the water going south. And as we know, it's almost not, it goes up and down, but say it's 90% to 95% water from the EAA, and hardly any Lake O water goes through there in the first place. So, you know, and that's based on the consent decree, but those are maintenance issues that we have to pay attention to, the cost long-term. So the lake, as you know, I'm sure others will talk about, is at 15.24 as of yesterday. Absolutely. We're reaching a point. All I would say is that we should also be thankful for the almost 2 years that we've had that we have not been dumped on. And so when we are asking to not be dumped on, I think it is very important that we are grateful to the Army Corps and others for having a break. Because if we seem ungrateful, they may even be more ready to dump on us. So the South Florida Water Management District, through Sean Cooley, the head of communications, put out a public message on what the South Florida Water Management District is doing, so that we're not having the releases from the estuaries. Basically, Mr. Cooley points out that the waters have been going into water conservation area 2. You know, you have those 3 water conservation areas underneath the stormwater treatment areas, and they're almost full. And we've been talking about that for 2 months now. And that's a problem. When they're full, you can't send the water south to Florida Bay or anything. And the only one that has a little bit of room is 2. And so that's where, you know, it has, over time, hopefully, sooner than later, that will be balanced out. Because I used to say, send the water south, send the water south. But I didn't understand that if the water conservation areas are full, that is not possible. So great to be back, and what a great meeting. And Ms. Reagan, very inspired by what you're talking about. I think I'll tell my husband I'd like to do some of those things to our house immediately.
Great, John. Thank you.
And I'd like to say that I've done that loop that, you know, is the ditch.
That's awesome.
I haven't done it around Biscayne Bay completely, but.
Very cool. Thank you.
So thank you, Jackie, for the district. The next kind of governing board coming up meeting is on October 8th. So they put out a notice. You have to register. You get online and you can go to attend that meeting. I know a lot of us do get on and attend, and we make comments, and the items that come up, whether on the consent agenda or on the regular agenda for discussion. The chairman is very open to public comment on those things. So you're able to get on that. That's October 8th is the next Water Management District meeting. The state and federal agencies, FDEP, FWC, I haven't noticed anybody on the phone. As far as the Corps of Engineers, Ben had mentioned that LOSUM is in process. It's kind of a longer process. But they did recently have a meeting last week on Thursday, the 17th, about the IDS, the Integrated Delivery Schedule. And they're coming up with a new updated draft for 2020 of the Integrated Delivery Schedule. And it outlines, you know, as what all the projects, whether they're foundation projects or, you know, different projects that are in line, like IRL South and the EA Reservoir and all those projects. And they've done a good job also on that new integrated delivery schedule to look at how the operating plans for those schedules are in place. And so a lot of us who are looking at that, I'll send it to Barbara so she can post it on our website at Rivers Coalition. But it's a draft EIS. They're going to have more kind of workshop on it. But it kind of outlines also the funding, and the funding for this coming fiscal year for the federal level is very good, and as well as the state. So projects get done. But as we move out a couple of years, it's going to be where more funding is really required to get the total done, and which is estimated at about 7.3 billion. So we're in a lot of effort to try to get, you know, funding secured as the projects get authorized and move forward on the integrated delivery schedule, or IDS, what we call it. Other than that, the Corps of Engineers, we're hoping to get, like I said, on presentation coming up on November, so we can query them all about what's going on there. So next on the agenda, we're looking at Lake Okeechobee, and I see Dr. Paul Gray is on board. Paul, can you give us some updates of what the lake's looking like and how things are going? Then we'll move into.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Paul Gray from Audubon. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah, so the lake is, as you heard, it's about 15.24 feet. That is almost a perfect elevation for the health of the lake now. At 15 feet, pretty much the whole marsh gets flooded. So we've got the whole marsh flooded plus about 3 inches. One of the important things is it only got up to 14 feet last year. So the area between 14 and 15 feet never flooded, and those wetlands just never were functioning. And what happens is you get terrestrial plant species starting to grow in there, your wetland species decline a little bit. And so having the lake back up to 15.3 is going to reverse that. It's going to kill off the terrestrials. It'll let the wetland plants grow. The last 2 years, we didn't have any snail kites nest on the lake because it got cleared down to 11 feet, too low for nesting. So this year we should have a very good drawdown, and snail kites should do better. Wading birds should do better. If a storm comes in, we're in trouble, but it's like we might be able to avoid that. So on the periodic scientist call this week, the Corps talk about banking water, that right now Lower says they could release up to 1170 out of the lake down to the St. Lucie, which is actually more than what you guys have been getting from C43, which would make it worse. But they kind of gave a hint that they might be easy on that, because even if they release what Lower says, it would only lower the lake maybe an inch a week. And with only about 4 or 5 weeks left of hurricane threat, it's really not very much. And so we urge them to take it easy on the releases. They're going to have a press conference at 1:30 today to talk about what they're going to do. So I'm hoping that they will spare the estuary, that we don't need to do it for the health of the lake. It's too late in hurricane season to really make much difference in the lake levels either. So, we're kind of praying that we don't get a we're doing real well, like, and it's got some blue-green algae, so you really don't want to get releases because that, could help your stuff down in your estuary because you've been already getting too much fresh water, too much nutrients from C44. So I'll take it easy, and if they do, we'll all be fine. So that's all I have.
Great, Paul. That's really good. Can I share my screen, Todd? Can you let me share the screen? Let's see how I do this. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, so can you all see the chart here? Just kind of nod your head. Is it sharing?
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah. So this is kind of the map from the periodic science call, and they talk about where the water's coming from, and here's where it jumped up, and it's up to a little bit higher than this 15.19 feet. And that gets within the foot of this intermediate band, and then they have to look at what Lower's 2008 recommends. And as Paul says, this is kind of this red arrow indicates where they can dump, they can discharge up to 1170 CFS at S80 and another 3,000 out to Caloosahatchee. But if they make a decision to do that, they have to take into consideration the local runoff in the S80 already, which is in the basin runoff that's already coming through. So the conditions warrant that they have to also consider downstream of what's happening downstream of S80. And if there's flood conditions that happen in the St. Lucie because of the storm surge and they get above 3 feet, then they're not allowed to discharge because they could flood out St. Lucie settlement, which is near the South Fork right there where the canal comes out. And so they are prevented from flooding if that happens. Like we said, there's a lot of water coming in from the watershed from the north. On the Kissimmee, it continues to come in. And if they need to, they could put water south, but these STAs are receiving a lot of water from the EA basin and also putting it south into the water conservation areas. And as Jackie Thurl said, it was filling up the water conservation areas and could be drowning some tree islands. So they're very concerned about that. But there's not much coming from the lake into the STAs and water conservation areas. So can they send more water south? They possibly could, but they have limitations on the south end of the system and how much goes through Tamiami Trail here at the bottom. The S12 structures and the S333 and those into Everglades National Park. So a lot coming in with local rainfall, could jump up. There's also other inflows, but what we're hoping, again, they don't have to dump through the St. Lucie estuary because it's a major system renovation. And as they said, our water quality might look good, but the South Fork is not looking too well. And there's a lot of issues with kind of with dealing with that as well. The constraints in the water quality constraints, here's the South Fork of the St. Lucie. This is in Lore's 2008 Lake Okeechobee schedule where it mentions that 3-foot elevation in the St. Lucie settlement subdivision on the South Fork. So they are restricted from kind of doing that in that case. So their kind of outlook is to say, well, we're going to decide what to do. But as Paul said, it'd be nice if they could hold off and use that in banking that kind of discharge and wait until a different season. But we're also hopeful we don't get another tropical storm event that jumps us up a couple of feet like it has in previous years. Then all bets are off, and for safety, they'd have to be discharging.
Yeah, Mark,
yeah.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, but can you go back to the decision tree real quick?
Yeah. This one, can you see it? Yeah.
No, I'm still on the map. Just the decision tree that had the red box and the arrows.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Notice that it says up to 3,000, up to 1170. So that means they don't have to do that full amount. They can do up to that, and they can do less. And that's that we're asking them to use to spare the estuary. So thank you.
Right.
Just want to point that out. Good
point. Good point. So thanks, Todd, for sharing that. Let me share that screen with everybody. On the agenda, we're talking about now kind of our local.
Did Jackie have a question? I saw you raise your hand.
Okay, Jackie. Yeah.
I do, Mark. And, so just to repeat and kind of understand, so and I should know this, but I don't totally. So under the new Lore's 2008 that we're under, what is the top that the lake can go to? Now let's take into account how much the Army Corps has already fixed of the dike around Lake Okeechobee, and how much is left. When Ed and I were at Clewiston, I could see that the Army Corps was, fixing the Rim Canal dike right there. But, I'm just curious, like, how does that tie into, it seems like the lake should be able to go higher for a temporary period of time because so much of the dike has been, improved very much so by the Army Corps of Engineers. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, real briefly, they started with a stretch that goes from Port Mayaca south to Pahokee, and then they on the Reach 2, which goes around the lake up to Clewiston, and Reach 3 that continues. And they're also trying to fix all the 20 plus culverts, big culverts around the lake that connect that to the Rindage. So they're still under construction with a lot of that. And until they finish the Herbert Hoover Dike rehabilitation, they're not going to really change the schedule to keep up the lake any higher than it already is under their current conditions, which is this operating schedule here. Paul, is that correct? I mean, they're still under construction with the Herbert Hoover Dike renovation.
Yeah, and as Mark said, they put that sleeve from Port Mayaca clear down to about South Bay. This area between things, yeah, that's a stretch they're working on. And so the most dangerous part of the dike they've already done. So in some ways the lake is safer already. They have a long stretch of about 15 miles that they do not have that sleeve impervious sleeve down the middle of the dike that prevents leakage that could lead to dike failure. So it's safer, but how much safer, we're not really sure.
So once they fix that area from wherever it is, south, very, very south of the lake, through Clewiston and then up to, I don't know, Fish Eating Creek or something. I mean, we should be in a better situation then, right, Mark? Where, and I know the schedule won't have changed or whatever, but I mean, just knowing that the dike has been, I want to say fixed. That's not a good word, but it's been majorly improved.
No, you're correct. You're correct. I mean, that they plan to be, the Hoover Dike improvements are on the IDS schedule or looking at 2022 to be completed. So, you know, they're looking to finish the dike project, and they've always said though that doesn't necessarily mean we can keep the lake higher. The argument's been, well, if we improve the dike, we can keep the lake as deep as we want. But they're still under a constraint to kind of move water out of the lake into a schedule that's somewhat similar to this. So when they adopt LORS 2022, they may have a different schedule, but it'll still look similar to when they get into these different bands. They'll have to operate differently. But just having the dike higher may or may not allow us to keep more water in the lake. And again, we have to consider lake ecology for drowning the lake. As Paul said, it's kind of ideal right now at 15.2, but if it gets too high for too long, it'll hurt the lake ecology as well. So we have to make provisions for them to have outlets south. I believe, you know, more outlets south, more capacity in the EA reservoir or other locations to move water south, rather than just being allowed to mainly dump it east and west. Because like you see this one part of the LORS schedule, part D, there's a part C, that's the other part that allows them to put water to the water conservation areas to go south. But that part C is only used if to the maximum extent practicable in the water conservation areas. And when they're above their schedule or full, they can't put water south. So they're kind of limited, or they're limiting through the current schedule of LORS 2008. They're not putting water south. They're only going to dump it east and west according to this.
I think Jim has a question. You have a question, Jim?
Yeah.
It was a comment as much as a question. It seems as though, you know, without Mod Waters and without the Tamiami Trail being unplugged, those WCAs are going to be full and there is no capacity to move it south.
Right. So down here at the bottom of the graph, you can see the S12 structures are at 1600 CFS. There's, you know, 4 or 5 of these culverts that go south. On the other side of Tamiami Trail, the east side, there's the 1 mile and the 2.5 mile bridging. And they're trying to move water through that, but they have to change those canal elevations on the north end. And they're using this S333 to move water to those locations in order to get water moving south. But you're correct, Jim. I mean, this Tamiami Trail kind of plug at the bottom is not allowing more water, and we got to do more than that to improve, you know, the connection between the Water Conservation Area 3A to the north and the Everglades National Park to the south. You're right.
Can I make a comment? I don't know if I can be, am I on?
Yeah, Joe, just briefly, and then we can move on. Great.
What Paul said to me was very interesting, such as 15.3 NGVD on the lake level is providing ideal water level at this time of year. That water level, as I understand it, Paul, would mean that you're cleaning more of the nutrients up from the lake. With the hardening, when it's finished, what would be, say, the ideal increased range that would possibly allow a flooding of the slopes slightly to increase the amount of marshes and possibly submergent aquatics along the lake edge? Question we don't know. Right now we're stuck with the current 15.5 and then they discharge. But it could be interesting, Jackie, as you were saying, if they improve everything with a vertical impervious up to about 35 feet. I believe that's the top of the bank of the current HHD. They would be able to therefore hold more water. If they hold more water, that's also being cleansed by more aquatic organisms. And therefore the complaint about not having enough water for everybody would be satisfied. There's a lot of things that could be worked into that if that could be hired and safely hired.
Paul, do you want to comment on that real quick?
Yeah, well, for the itself, the stage envelope used to be 12.5 to 15.5, and that's been adjusted downward to 12 to 15. We think that's better for the lake marshes themselves. And if we could keep the lake in that range, especially the submerged plants would be very, very healthy. And ironically, if they're really strong and healthy, then when we get a hurricane, we could let the lake get deeper without that much damage because those plants are resilient. And so, you know, when the lake is 16 feet right now, the coast's very, very nervous, and they've released water as fast as they can. In a future safer dike, try to keep it in the 12 to 15 range, hopefully. But if it did deep, we could meter the water out more slowly. We could take a week off and let the oysters recover and stuff like that, where the plants would be resilient and wouldn't die as quickly, and you know, we could just manage. So I think we don't want deep levels, but we will be able to tolerate deep levels for longer periods because we have a safer dike plant community.
Thanks.
It's kind of a nuanced answer, but that's, you know, it's kind of a vision we have.
River Kids, Nick Mater, how's things going with River Kids? You want to give a brief report? Nick is on, I thought.
You want Toby for state legislator?
Oh, Toby, you have any comments for state legislation in the session coming up, I guess, is after first of the year?
Yeah, thanks for the vote of confidence. Yep, we are, this is amazing as far as the looking at this type of development. And I think it's something that, you know, I wrote down looking at legislation to basically be cleaning out the old stormwater sites and things like that. I think that's something that we need to look at. We've had these developments in there historically for a long time. And I've just been appointed to a resiliency board for the Florida home builders. And also, as you know, filed some legislation on BMAPs. So as a result, those are two areas that I think we could look at that legislatively there could be a fix associated with some of these drainage areas. I know in the development that I live in Palm City, we just redid a couple of our drainage areas, and it's literally a completely new facility. So I think it's something that we could look at, we could plan on, and is certainly a way of reducing the outflows, and I can appreciate that. And Jackie, thank you for mentioning the interconnect as well. That's a really important issue that will be able to move water back and forth rather than necessarily out. And also the C23 and 24 reservoirs, as you all know, are well behind schedule. Need to be brought forward and need to be an area that we're concentrating on. Also, it appears that probably by the end of November / early December, the permitting from the Corps of Engineers will be delegated instead to FDEP in the state of Florida. That doesn't mean that the regulations are going away or they're any less stringent. What it does mean is that we're probably going to get our permits a lot faster. And that's obviously critical when we're dealing with all of these various issues that are happening for restoration activities, et cetera. When now we're able to have somebody that is going to be answering that phone all the time and will be held to, I believe, a stricter standard as far as
what permitting was that you were talking about?
404 permitting for the Corps of Engineers. This does not include tidal waters and that type of thing. It only includes obviously areas that are traditionally Corps permitting that are surrounded by uplands, et cetera, that are not tidally influenced. So, but these restoration areas all south of the lake, they'll instead now shift for the most part to a lot of state permitting rather than the federal side. So again, it's an area that we were working on the last 2 years, and now it's come to fruition. So those are great things. I really appreciate this update, and certainly want to be looking at how we can be implementing some of this stuff as we move forward. So thanks for the opportunity to talk. I sincerely appreciate it.
Thanks for attending, Representative. So Nick Mader, are you on still? Nick, give us an update on River Kids, and then we'll go to local and wrap it up.
Yeah, not much to report with COVID going on and getting children together, but I just did want to remind everybody to take a look at the Rivers Coalition website under the River Kids tab and check out the digital workbook that is online. So share it and get it to the teachers and let's have it be used. So that's about it.
Yeah, the River Kids have been active out there in coastal cleanups, and this was National Estuary Week this past week, so we celebrated estuaries, and they were out there helping up to clean our estuary. I know that Mike Connor, you're on board with some local issues and been out on the water. So Todd, I don't want to skip over you. Todd Weissing, are you there with any Speaker Bureau update, or are you good?
He called in, he left me a text. He's in the car and he was trying to get in by phone, but I don't think he did.
Okay, good. So yeah, so great. We'll stay in touch with Todd. If you have any communities that want to get a speaker, Todd, just get in touch with Todd through Barbara at the Rivers Coalition info. Mike Connor, are you on board? And Todd, did you have some pictures that Mike took that you wanted to share of the river local? What's happening?
I think Mike is on a video shoot on the algal bloom up in the Indian River Lagoon with Alex Garicki and Dylan Hansen. I think this is the area that Todd was just showing that they're focusing on, this algal bloom.
So that's the algal bloom up there. I know Mike was also out on the waterways here too, and he mentioned that he was visiting a lot of our local waters.
This is a picture of the coastal cleanup weekend ago. This is showing the saltwater coming into the lagoon, and it's cleared up considerably. It looks like mangroves are forming on the rock ledge there. That's a relatively clean water for this time of year.
This looks a little turbid. Todd sharing. This looks like in one of the forks or up the fork.
This one is an aerial, and I think if we can zoom out a little bit, it shows this mixing of the springtide saltwater with the local runoff. And if you look in some of the backyards, you can see how full of water they are.
Yeah, we've had some really super big tides because of the storm surge as well, pushing up against the coast from Hurricane Teddy and the high pressure system, along with the new moon condition and also
it's sort of a perfect storm for high water in the river and the lagoon.
Oh, that doesn't look good. Where was that?
This is not St. Patrick's Day. This is definitely what we think it is.
That's Tuesday, September 15th. Was that out at the at Port Mayaca?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, I think there have been blooms, and the Corps even reported that on Tuesday's meeting as well. There's Mike.
Mike is out collecting water samples.
Good man.
That's kind of the extent of the photos he sent us.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing those.
I don't know if Diane wanted to look at this one. This could be indicative of that brown water mass.
This right here.
Yeah, the aerial.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of groundwater coming in, about 300 CFS coming in from groundwater seepage into the St. Lucie estuary, and there's been studies by the district and others on that for years.
Todd, if you pan over a little bit to the left, as that tributary comes in, you can see a trail of darker surface water runoff into the.
Yeah. Right. Hey, Todd, I saw you just quickly had up that announcement about the subcommittee meeting, the Congressional Authorization Subcommittee. Unfortunately, folks, that occurred right here at 11 o'clock, the same time our meeting was. Some people are monitoring it. There are some key witnesses up there from our state. environmental issues. Brian Mast is the representative who chairs this subcommittee on water quality, and he was holding this about getting more input to that. So there are some debriefings from that I'm sure that you're going to hear about in the news and some other places. Please go to Todd's website too if y'all haven't visited Eye on Lake O, EYE on Lake O. Eye on Lake O is a great website Todd has with all kinds of detailed information. Here you go, showing again, started out years back with those satellite images. I remember 2013, it was like, oh my gosh, coming up, and
this
Todd,
is
it's been amazing to show that. So this is more recent.
Yeah, this is yesterday.
Yesterday, a little bit of cloud cover I see over on the east shore, but there was a bloom potential or a site that on the left-hand side, you can see that up in the north part of the lake. So if they, current, yeah.
That's the gates right now.
So they have been discharging up to even 2,500 CFS, which is about 1.6 billion gallons a day. According to the schedule, if they went to 1170 CFS, that's about 756 million gallons a day. It's not too much, but it's a lot, when you put that on top of all the other freshwater inflows we have to the estuary. And again, for a long duration, it's going to be detrimental. If it's for a short duration, it's not bad because it's like a big storm event, right? But if it's for a long duration, over time, those oyster reefs and seagrass are detrimental. So thanks, Todd, for hosting and bringing this up. Please go to Eye on Lake O. There's some of the discharge flows. Oh yeah, that's the parameter at is that elevation or CFS? So
that's CFS on S80.
Yeah.
And they're going right now. I mean, that's the live picture. Yeah. They got 2 gates open right now.
They're constrained by tide.
Yeah, and then here's that tide chart. But I mean, the tides have gone down. So at 6 o'clock this morning, it was down to 1.4.
Yeah. So as that subsides, they'll have more capacity to let it out. But again, we don't want them to discharge. Absolutely, we don't need the water. Save it for the Caloosahatchee or the Everglades later. We don't need it. So that's it. Well, I sure appreciate everybody's attendance. And if you have any questions or comments, and also put in to info@riverscoalition.org to Barbara, and Barbara can get it over onto the website. Also announcements about any meetings. Does anybody have any quick announcements about meetings or, things that are coming up?
Yeah, this is
yeah, I think Greg Braun, I think I saw you, and then we'll recognize others. Go ahead, Greg.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I'm with the Guardians of Martin County, and if you haven't heard, we've been working on an initiative recently to bring some privately owned lands in the western Hobe Sound area into conservation ownership and management. We're calling it the Loxalucy Headwaters, and we are scheduled to give a couple presentations this coming month. There is a PowerPoint presentation on the Guardians of Martin County website, but I'm also scheduled to present at the Loxahatchee River Management Council this coming Monday. So that's going to be via Zoom, so you can attend that. Also on the schedule is a presentation to the Martin County chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society in their monthly meeting in October. That is October the 6th, and that'll be a Zoom meeting. And then also scheduled for the Town of Jupiter Island Commission on the 15th of October. I've sent the presentation to Mark, and I'm hoping to be scheduled to also present it at a future Rivers Coalition meeting. Thank you.
We're looking forward to working you in.
Yeah, Jim is, I talked to Jim about it, Greg, and we'll kind of see if we can't get it onto a schedule coming up. But
Greg?
go to the Guardian's website and you can link on to those kind of meeting dates. Barbara, go ahead.
Greg, what was that Monday meeting on Zoom?
That is the meeting of the Loxahatchee River Management Coordinating Council.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
It is going to be on Zoom. It starts at 2 o'clock.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other member announcements or talks? Fantastic. Well, again, everybody, thanks for joining Rivers Coalition. We'll see you next month. Our next monthly meeting set for the 22nd of October, 11. So please join us then. And
Joanie Regan, thank you very much.
yeah, thank you very much, Joanie Regan. Appreciate your comments, and also MRC. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. And thank you guys for, I heard a comment on, if you would like to be part of the co-signing of the letter, we can certainly fit you in there. Font can always get a little bit smaller.
Well, our board did vote to go ahead and be a sign-on, so I think we're ready to help with that.
Good.
All right, so moving on. Here's the
I
witness
don't know if you
list.
guys can see that, but I don't know if that meeting's still going on, but you can flip from this meeting over to the
over to that meeting,
committee meeting on the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan.
Great. Just click on it. I hope it's going on.
Great presentation, Joanie.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Todd, for hosting up, and Barbara and everybody. Take care, and we'll see you on next meeting, if not before. Keep the river. Keep safe. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for an informative meeting.
Certainly.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Jim.
I'm going to finish reading the comments.
Yeah, I wonder if we can save them. Yeah, I'm gonna save the comments here.
So I see that somebody had asked for the PDF, so they have an email in there. Oh, but the C is missing from there.
It's actually going to do a file. I wanted to save it. Save chat. That's what I'm trying to do. Chat saved. Guess I'll figure out where that is.
This is Daryl. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good evening, guys.
Yeah, it went well.
Yeah, only had 5 drop calls driving down the road, but we were able to get up and listen to 90%.
Yeah. So I'm still recording, but I guess I'll stop the recording here in a second. It'll all be recorded for you for later.
Great. Yeah, I did. I watched the other board meeting. I was able to download it. Thank you. Okay, signing off.